Okay, let's dive into a guy who goes by the name of Robert Gronkowski, a.k.a. Gronk. In my lifetime, probably when he was at the peak of his powers, the most dominant, well-rounded tight end I've ever seen. Say Tony Gonzalez, Shannon Sharp, Antonio Gates. There's a group of them. But when I think those guys, I think more pass catching, right? They are receivers, great receivers. Tony Gonzalez, greatest receiving tight end ever. But when I think Gronk, I think a well-rounded, ass-kicking machine. Obviously, playing for the Patriots, being part of that dynasty, being one of their best players and playing with Tom, took him to another level, and then his personality. But last year he retired, right? And 2 years ago, he thought about retiring when Belichick traded him or was going to trade him to the Detroit Lions. Smartest thing he's ever done. I would never play for Matt Patricia or the Detroit Lions if I didn't have to and I had leverage like him and didn't necessarily need the job or the money. So I commend him on that decision. Basically stuck the middle finger at Belichick and the Lions and said, I'm not doing this. And remember that pissed off Brady. And it was, some drama. And then the next year he'd clearly already been thinking about it and he retired. And sometimes, and I know this for me personally, my job now is not physically taxing. I mean, the only physically taxing thing I may do is go on a jog or ride the elliptical or my new spin bike that I had delivered just because I needed to get the cardio going. But like most people that have office jobs, it can be mentally exhausting. And I saw this year with the coronavirus and everyone kind of thinking that everything was going to be canceled, like I was at a breaking point. And I needed to just take a couple weeks to just take a step back. Now, I kept doing this podcast. It's not ultimately that hard a labor, but you hear people, CEOs, and I saw it when I worked in the NFL, like summer break was a really big deal. People just unplugged and got away. And it's hard for high achievers to unplug. I imagine many people listening, even when you go on vacation, if you play a big role at your company, if you run your company, if you're a manager, it's hard to just not think about what you're doing. I know this. I feel guilty in a weird way, and I've gotten a little better at this when I'm older, if I'm like screwing around for a week. Like if I just go play golf for the day, whatever. But if I'm trying to detach for a week, it's one thing in the summer, but like even in the fall, like last year, my mom wanted to go to Hawaii for Thanksgiving. I mean, I took all my stuff, recorded like 3 podcasts there. It's just difficult, but it is very healthy. And oftentimes, certain people really, really need a year away. And I think the year away for Gronkowski is going to be the best thing that ever happened to him because physically, he was a shell of himself. And that's the thing with pro sports. Like most jobs, even if you are quote-unquote burned out, it's mentally. And listen, I know when I get burned out mentally, you become a miserable SOB. It really wears on you. I can't imagine being burned out mentally and being physically just beat to hell. And that's what Gronk was that last season in 2018, where he had 47 catches and 3 touchdowns. And we all watched him. He wasn't moving. He looked terrible. Now, he had what turned out to be the game-winning catch in the Super Bowl, but he was basically at that season more of a glorified blocker, where the previous season he had 70 catches and 8 touchdowns. Like he was still a really, really good player, and then he kind of fell off a cliff. And I watched him talk on the NFL Network. There's a smile. There's a glow to the guy. Take the year off. You get to take a deep breath. You get to take a step away. And then you get to come back reinvigorated with a new coach, with a new vibe in South Florida, with a bunch of other skill guys. Here's the other thing in New England. He had to carry the load, right? I mean, he was their red zone target. He was, now you could argue Julian Edelman, there are given games and given seasons where he was their most productive guy, but Gronk was the number one guy you game planned against of all the skill guys. They never had a dominant running back. Like he was by far their number one weapon. And even on their best teams, like he was their number one weapon. And I think he kind of changed the game where you truly look at tight ends like that's the number one wide receiver, even though he's a tight end. And I know the 49ers are like that. Like they don't have a number one wide receiver. The number one target is George Kittle. He's the number one guy a defensive coordinator game plans against. And I think that can just, when you're a physical player, if you do it for a long period of time and you've had a bunch of injuries, it can drive you down. Like Tom wasn't beat up physically. He doesn't get touched. Tom was just mentally drained of dealing with Belichick. He just wanted a fresh start. But physically, I watch all these videos. He's always been spry, moving around fine. Like Tom just needed to get away from Bill. Gronk needed to get away from football. He wasn't moving right. And when you're asked, think about this, as a tight end, you don't make what top offensive tackles are, what they make. You don't make what top wide receivers make, yet you are, when you're his type player, you're dependent, you are asked to produce at their level in the passing game, especially when it comes to touchdowns and in the red zone. And you're also asked to do what left tackles do in the running game when it comes to blocking, I don't know, the most expensive players on the other team, the defensive ends and the outside linebackers, the pass rushers. It's a tough, demanding job. And watching this interview with Brian Billick and MJD, now Gronk's always a positive guy. He's always smiling. He's always happy. He's always got that kind of goofball vibe to him. But I saw a guy that just, like a new human being. And I can't imagine what that feels like to be like, I feel fresh. I feel great about my body because I'm still bigger than everyone else. I didn't forget how to catch, right? I just need to, and as he said, the first couple practices were really hard. I hadn't practiced against a starting defense in a long time. Iron sharpens iron, right? But when you're a player of that caliber, you get back in the mix pretty fast, especially when you know the quarterback. So, and everyone on that team is kind of dependent on him in terms of the other skill guys picking his brain about Tom. I would not be shocked. Now, I don't think we're going to see some historic 15 touchdown season from Gronk. There's way too many players. But I think he will look much more closely to the guy that he resembled in 2017 when he caught 8 touchdowns, caught 70 balls, but just that, like he has that production left in him, than the guy we saw in 2018 that we just watched move and went, is this the Rob Gronkowski that I know and love? Is this the Rob Gronkowski that will one day be in the Hall of Fame, that's moving not very well, that can't run routes, that can't get open, that can't run away from safeties? Because I don't like watching this Rob. I like the star Rob. Now, he'll never be what he was 2011, 12, 13, early before his knees got all messed up and his elbows. But I would not be shocked with how excited Tom's going to be, with how much juice Bruce Arians is going to be, with how much just extra juice he's going to get when he looks to the left of him and he sees Mike Evans, when he looks to the right of him and he sees Chris Godwin, and then he looks across the line of scrimmage or across his own offensive line and sees O.J. Howard or Cameron Brate on the other side. He goes, you know what? I don't have to carry this offense like an NBA player. Like what LeBron has to do every year for his team is not, or James Harden or, star players on their team is difficult, right? You have to carry the load. You are not allowed to have down games. For the Patriots to be good, like Gronk had to be good. He had to dominate in the run game and he had to dominate in the passing game, which for the most part he always did. And I think this year he can just not be on cruise control, but just be a member of the team. And if he's just a member of your team, and he's healthy, and he's spry, and he still has the gigantic frame, I actually think that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers might have one of the great curveballs in recent memory in this offseason retirement trade edition, obviously of Tom Brady, but of Rob Gronkowski. What's up, everybody? My name is John Middlekauff, and I host a show for Colin Cowherd called 3 and Out on his podcast network. You can subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcast. I worked in the NFL as a scout for Andy Reid and Howie Roseman, and I've been talking about football for the last 7 years. If you like your football talk, raw and unfiltered, no BS, I'm your guy. Subscribe to 3 and Out right now.